Bonjour, je m'appelle SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Aujourd'hui, on parle le français. Sorry, was that a bad joke? I thought it was funny. Today, on the opening survey, we're going to be looking at the French defense. Haha. Okay, so, alright, again, bad joke, I'm sorry. So that's right, we're going to look at the absolute worst, least favorite, the opening that absolutely no one likes, the French defense. The one that leads to boring, ugly, stupid positions, and if we could all vote to get one opening eliminated forever, it'd be this one. Okay, so maybe not, but I need to get my biases out of the way very quickly, is that this is by far my least favorite of the main openings. Like, by a very large amount. I never enjoyed it as white. I've never enjoyed it as black. Honestly, it's a blight on chess as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah. So again, take what I say here. I'm definitely not the expert on this for either color, white or black. So you'll need to not just rely on what I say here in this video as your ultimate answer to the French defense. However, we can talk about the general ideas, the plans, the strategies. I can do that. I'll do it quite quickly. It definitely won't be half an hour like it is in the Sicilian videos. And then also, if you're also a French hater, then I give you an idea at the end of how I've played this opening for many years, and it's given me some pretty good success. In fact, I'm 60% plus in my Blitz games using it, and not bad. So I'll share that at the very end. But first off, let's actually talk about the French. What is the French defense? So the French defense is characterized by e4, let's see, here we go, e6, d4, d5. This general opening here. And it's easiest to talk about it if we cement the pawn structure. Because this, where white has the pawns here and here, and then black has the pawns like that, this pawn structure is very common in the French defense, and you really need to understand that to understand the French defense at all. If you don't know what to do here, then you're going to have not a lot of fun playing the French defense. Though arguably you'd never have fun playing the French defense. Okay, I'm sorry, that'd be the last time I joke about that. So if we look at this from white's perspective, is that this pawn on e5, it's on black's half of the board, it's well protected, it's doing a cramping effect onto black's position. And this really highlights white's advantage, or what he's trying to do in this position. There's a well-known rule in chess that you generally want to play A, where you have more space, and B, where your pawns tend to point. And if we look at this position, we can see that these pawns, whoops, not sideways, frig, let's try this again. These pawns, aha, are more or less pointing in this direction. And so what white tends to do, or what it wants to do, is generally put his pieces in a position where they're aiming that way. And we can see that they already are. White is naturally ready to expand and move over on this direction. So this tends to be what white wants to do. He already has a space advantage, that's great, so he just needs to make sure that the center stays strong, and then he can start throwing his pieces, maybe his pawns as well, up the board, and really explode on the king side. That's white's main goal. What about for black? Well, for black, we can see that his pawns are aiming at the opposite side, and so black tends to play more on the queen side. It's much harder for black to play on the king side, at least right away in most positions. And so we can see moves like this, and knight c6, maybe bishop d7, the bishop's already over here. And so we can see how black is naturally poised to play over on this half. That said, there's two special features of the French defense that we should talk about right away. First is this bishop. This bishop sucks. It has one good square, that's great. And when black loses, it's often because of this bishop. Black is unable to find a good role for it, and then he's effectively playing down a piece. This is especially true. There are some lines where black is trying to attack on the queen side, and he's playing moves like a6 and b5, and that just puts every single pawn on the light squares, so the bishop is terrible, the bishop never does anything, black is playing without a piece. Not very good. As mentioned, white does have a space advantage, so that means black, almost by definition, has a space disadvantage. And so he needs to be able to maneuver in such a way where his pieces don't step on each other. That also suggests that black likes piece exchanges, and he should not fear them. But perhaps the most important thing that for both sides, which is going to really dictate the strategy, is this pawn right here. Is this pawn strong or is it weak? If it's strong, then this pawn is strong, which means white has a very stable advantage. Yay! If the pawn is weak, then that means white is going to need to use his pieces to defend the pawn, and then his pieces can't be used for anything else. They're stuck on guard duty. And then black is able to start expand, he's able to get the favorable exchanges, he's able to apply pressure, and black has the better game. And so, no real two ways about it. If it's strong, white is better. If it's weak, black is better. If we're to look at let's look at some concrete lines here. So for instance, after c5, immediately trying to attack the pawn. If white were to take, okay, there's no weak pawn anymore, but now this pawn has lost some of its protection. And black can now develop all of his pieces in such a way where he's trying to pressure that pawn. Maybe he could also play f6, just to open lines, get the f-file after he castles, this sort of thing. So white rarely captures on c5 so quickly. He wants to make sure his e5 pawn is protected. And so usually there's a big song and dance about this pawn, right? Black attacks it, white defends it, black attacks it, the queen's attacking through. And I need to emphasize this right now, because I've seen quite a few of beginner, early intermediates, so people around the 14, even up to 1600 rating online, where they simply lose this pawn due to black's pressure. They don't respect it. They'll do things like bishop b2, and then maybe after knight e7, they'll castle, and then after knight to d4, we see the pawns attack 3 times. It's only defended twice. And it's actually not easy to defend it a third time. So if you try and use your bishop, then queen takes b2, and you've lost that pawn instead. So that's not very good. And so this shows how fast the pressure can actually ramp up. White needs to be extremely careful about that pawn. He can't be careless. He can't just play normal moves, bishop b2 and castle. He has to do something else. For instance, in this very position, he can play knight a3, so that way after castle, knight f5, or sorry, after knight f5, knight c2, now it's defended 3 times, it's attacked 3 times, just imagine that's red, like that, there we go. And then we'll see what happens from here. Is white tied up defending, or is he simply overprotecting the pawn, and then later he can start chasing the pieces back and expand? That's going to be the question in this type of position. If we back up, around here, one of the main moves is actually a3. With the idea, if we look at the exact same line, let's look at something like this, knight e2, white can play b4, and then after knight f5, the bishop can come here. Now the bishop is protecting the pawn, so white is fully protected, and by pushing the pawn, there's no longer a b2 pawn for black to win. So this is a very common maneuver for white. But this is the general idea of that, and this is true across many different variations. For instance, with these knight c3 lines, we get something very similar. We have these pawns here. The difference is the knight is already on here, so it's harder for white to play c3 right away. So white, in this type of structure, would often do something like this. We're going to play with f4. Then after c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3. We can see again, white is developing with a constant eye on the d4 square. If he does end up taking later, then he's got the f-pawn and the e-pawns. The f-pawn is helping protecting. That's very nice. Notice how the pawn could always keep going forward with f5 to start the kingside attack later. So that's great. And this, I believe, is considered the main line of the French nowadays. Whereas black, he's got the same ideas that he wants to do. He wants to bring his queen out to b6, where he's putting more pressure. He's going to want to take sooner or later. And one of the advantages about taking is that white doesn't have a pawn that he can recapture with. These positions can get quite interesting if white castles queenside. So if I don't really remember my theory at all in this position, let's just look at something like, I think it's a6, queen d2, whoops, something like b5. Yeah, let's just pretend that this is where white is prepared to do things like this, and you know, throw all the pawns at black, maybe not that. Take here and then move the knight to d4, and he's got the attack going. But also, he's castled right into black's wheelhouse, where these pawns are coming, and the queen's coming, or the queen's coming, and this could be a very lively game. Or, potentially, white can just play bishop e2, castle this way, and try and nibble black with his small space advantage. Possibilities. But notice again how it's this square that is so central to absolutely everything. One of the reasons I really dislike the French, okay, those positions are okay, maybe, sort of, yeah, they're still kind of blocked, is that there are variations like this. Now, again, I'm not completely sure of my theory, so I believe it's take, something like this, in which it's always possible in this type of position for black to do something like this. Now, immediately the computers and the grandmasters, they all say, oh, this is a terrible move because it releases the tension, and white's center is now perfectly strong, and et cetera, yada yada. Which maybe is true, sure, why not, objectively speaking. But I look at this position, I think, what the heck do I even do? This bishop is now stuck being on e2. If I put the bishop on e2, my queen can't really move. I've got weak pawns. I'm going to castle. It's not clear how I want to attack. I mean, I would love my bishop to be on d3, but I can't get it there. So, I'm going to have to attack with my bishop on e2 with this bishop here. If this bishop moves and that pawn falls, okay, that's kind of crappy. It's really hard to reorganize my pieces on the queen side. Can't do anything in the center. It's kind of stuck. But the same thing's kind of true for black. What's black going to attack? I mean, maybe these positions suck. I look at them and I yawn and I opt for a draw right away. In fact, I played a game against someone rated over 2,000, and I won a pawn. I had a great position, but it was so blocked for 40 moves. We're just moving our pieces around. There's nothing you can do with the pawns, or there was nothing that I could do, and I was fortunate that he hung a piece later on and resigned. Right? Like, terrible, terrible positions, in my opinion. Another one to notice is that there are some French players that play it what's known as the Rubinstein Variation. They take like this, which is kind of funny, because if you look at the statistics in this type of position, black wins something like 15% of the games. So white wins 40% of the time, and he draws 35% of the time. And so this is the least ambitious way of playing. And we can see that right away. Black's bishop still sucks, still behind the pawn. He still has less space. And this pawn is nowhere near as weak as it is before. It can only be protected by c3. There's no e5 pawn for black to try and target later on. White has super easy development. I don't know why anyone would want to play these positions as black. Well, of course, I do know is that play tends to be very thematic. Black is going to do the same general moves all the time. So there we go. And there isn't a heck of a lot of theory compared to other openings and such, but it's a really unambitious, yucky way to play, in my opinion. And it's like, ugh. Then there's one more. And so this is what's known as the exchange variation. This is the variation that all French players hate, which is why I play it as white. If they play an opening I dislike, I'm going to make them not like it. The reason they dislike it is it leads to what are considered very boring positions, at least for black. This is because the position is very symmetrical. In fact, it is symmetrical. And both sides tend to develop the exact same way. You know, they put their pieces on the exact same squares. They're both going to castle. All the rooks get traded on the open e-file. And it can be very hard for black to play for a win. Or for black to play for a win, he has to create a lot more risks, perhaps unjustifiably so, than in other openings. And that said, again, if you're going to play the French defense, then you got to be ready for this. In fact, I'd actually say this, is that if you are at all interested for some reason in playing the French defense as black, I don't know why you are, I can't hammer this home enough, this is a terrible opening, you would need to actually know what to do in these type of positions, because you're going to face it a lot. But now, in this very position, This would be Smithy's recommendation. What I've played for many years, I learned it from Josh Waitskin in the old Chess Master videos, is with c4. So I don't even know if this has a name. I think I've heard it was called the Monte Carlo at one point, but let's call it that. And what we're aiming for is, just imagine he takes. This is completely different from the French defense. Normal positions, where we had those pawns all stuck here, the center is closed, like just call it a draw right now, it's terrible. This is the exact opposite. This is wide open. We got an isolated pawn, which is very rare in the French defense, because again, the center is always closed. Here the center is wide open. There tends to be a lot of tactics, and the position is, again, it's very different, which is exactly why I play this. Most people who play the French defense, they want to play these blocked, closed positions where they have this long-term plan, they know generally what to do, and things are slower. There's no going to be fast attacks in the first 12 moves here. It's not going to be the case. They enjoy the blocked, maybe they're sociopaths or something, but they enjoy this type of position. And so one of my big things is, when I play chess, is to not let my opponent have what he wants. And so I don't want to give him that closed structure. So I take. This immediately opens things up. And if you were to take again, the position is about as open as we've already had 2 pawns exchanged. It's a exchange French, but it's nowhere near drawish. White has an advantage of very fast, easy, simple development. He has a center pawn, which can easily go forward, open C, open E files, and in practice, there's some pretty good attacks that go on in here. If I just, I often play this, so with the knight on E2 instead of on F3, just because if black ever plays this, trying to pin the knight, I can play F3. If the bishop comes here, I can then play knight F4, and I'm immediately going to win the 2 bishops, which is great. If he goes here, I then want to put my knight on G3. Again, I attack the bishop, and if it retreats, I keep going with F4, where I'm threatening to play F5 and trap the bishop. That's kind of the theme here. Then after H6, F5, bishop F. So this is so much better than a regular French defense. Look at this. This bishop is encaged. So now the question now becomes, can black free it? If black can, he's perfectly fine. If he can't, if this pawn is always there, so we can imagine, something like this, where all of my pieces are defending this pawn, and we can trade everything else, then he's simply playing down a piece. And it's absolutely terrible. And this, if black has never seen this variation before, like why would he? Then he has a huge practical disadvantage, because I've been playing it, pretty much since I've created my first opening repertoire, 10 or so, however long it's been. Right? Fantastic, and it's novel, and it's amazing, and it's interesting, and it's vibrant, and it's so much better than the regular French defense. If I were to back up, actually, if we were to look at this position, this is after C4, if black takes. Taking isn't the best move here, of course. Black should wait until the bishop moves before he takes, because then he can win a tempi. But just look at this position here. So we can see it, d-pawn, see it, right? This is the exact same position as if we would have started with d4 with the queen's gambit. If we just look at this is one of the lines. It's the exact same position. And so by playing this variation, it's possible to quote-unquote trick your opponent into a line of the queen's gambit accepted, which is about as stylistically different from the French defense as you can possibly get. That's pretty nice. I think that's it. I think that is everything for everything I wanted to cover. So the most important thing is A, don't play the French defense, but B, if you do, or you play against someone who does do this, unfortunately, this pawn is absolutely critical. And so you need to make sure that you're always watching that. And again, as white, if you can secure this center, where everything is fine and black does not have any pressure, then you just have a space advantage. You can start throwing your pawns up the board, and you can start attacking, and it's going to go great because you have a space advantage and your center is secure. So you have to always watch your center. And if you're black, make sure you don't play the French defense, or if you do, take a look at Simon Williams. He's got some. He plays the French defense. You can check out his blitz videos, his YouTube channel. He also has. It's a little bit dated at this point, but he has a book and an online course, or a DVD, as he calls it, on his website, gingergm.com. It's dated, but again, his explanations and his teaching style, I think, is just absolutely amazing, and we should support good content creators. So take a look at his work. In particular, there's also a Chessable course on Chessable called Master the French, which goes into this. The authors there are absolutely excellent. If you have questions, like, they answer it within a day. Imagine that. Imagine having a book in which you are the grandmaster or the master is actually coming back and answering the questions that you have about the material. Frig, right? So you can check that out if, again, for some reason you want to learn more about this terrible opponent. I kid a little bit, but seriously, don't play the French defense. So that's it. We'll keep going with this opening survey throughout the summer, but that's going to be it for now. All right, everyone. So SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Merci d'avoir regardé, merci d'avoir écouté. Au revoir.